Well, hello there, everyone. You have right here, talk about right here, of remembering September 11th right here, and you have right here is talking about right here of like talk about predictable spelling test right here. So this right here will be me right here of what I would look like back whenever I was a sophomore in high school actually, and just like say the student of the week photo right there. But still, it sure seems that way. That when we think about September 11th right here, that it's like say you remember that tragic day right there. But it sure seems that way that I can just remember that of talking about with the typical spelling test, and so it sure seems that way that one thing that I did want to talk about right here is that knowing about the predicting about what could happen. So what does it usually mean whenever we predict something, about happening? And so a lot of times it sure seems that way, like everybody else would say too, that whenever you predict something to happen, is toward that something something you think could happen. And they talk about for warning signs. So I know with me though, I can remember that it was on September the 8th that I actually was in a spelling test during the time, and I can just remember that whenever it comes to understanding about urgency, and also you'll never forget your spelling test right here. But you have right here talk about for urgency. So what is what does it usually mean when we speak about any source of emergency though? And a lot of times it's like, well, really, do you kind of get that idea by looking through a window, or for anything about knowing about what goes on outside, or anything such as toward that if we're talking about that whenever you were working on something and trying to work on something, and find out that that you were in a meeting, or maybe if you were maybe in a doctor's appointment or something like that. And so I have right here, this right here, like everybody else would say too, that even if you're working with a black and white sketch or something like that. But I want to show everybody here, this right here, talking about for the 20th anniversary right here of September 11th right here. But talking about right here that one thing that I know that the teacher would a lot of times would ask me about is toward that write a complete sentence about for what you taught, what you think about the newscast. And so let's just say that if we're talking about our freedom, our freedom, and like, or something like our freedom, and then also whenever it comes to understanding about terrorists, and also whenever it comes to understanding about reasons why, reasons why. So whenever you read stuff about on the news, and I know a lot of times everybody else would say too that that if you're going to be getting into a conversation about something, a lot of times that reasons why you explain. And I know a lot of times it seems like that you really tell people too that when they begin these conversations, a lot of times that why is it that you would maybe have to explain your answer if you answer a question to a certain topic or something like that. That why do you think that maybe people would ask you to explain your answer, explain why you give this reason or why you give that reason or something like that. But you have talking about for the typical spelling test right here. So I can just remember that it was on like it was September the 5th is whenever I was studying about the spelling test, about how to spell how to spell ambulance. How to spell ambulance, and also about maybe fire truck or something like that. Fire truck, And then also that yeah, police or firemen, fire truck or something like that. And so I can just remember that police, fire truck, and ambulance right here. But how many of us can remember, Abaz, to where on your spelling test, though, besides urgency, though, did they really ask you to spell anything such as to where, engage or something like that, engage control? For engage control, well, what exactly does that mean whenever we say engage control? So it's like, yeah, that whenever we're talking about for engage, that well, what exactly does that mean when we say engage? And like everybody else might say that, really that why would you want to spend time maybe signing any sorts of stickers or something like that whenever it comes to something like that? But it sure seems that way that when we talk about for engage and maybe when we talk about for any sorts of urgency or something like that, and you want to know too that really that when we're talking about a spelling test or any sorts of test, though, it's supposed to be by testing your knowledge, right? But half the time you want to know too that really what would you how would your response be whenever it comes to any source of tragedy? So I guess that's like the question right here whenever it comes to September 11th right here. Talk about for tragedy. What exactly is tragedy? What exactly does that mean when we speak about tragedy? That means is toward it a situation that for what goes on unexpectedly. Yeah, unexpectedly. So yeah, if the situation goes on for unexpectedly, tragedy right there. So it sure seems that way. That it's just, like yeah, it's supposed to be any normal day that you were showing up for work. And one morning you were showing up for your meeting. Maybe if you were getting ready to talk to somebody, somebody was getting ready to go on a on a vacation somewhere or something like that, and find out that you did not expect for the terrible situation to happen. So it sure seems that way. That why do you think that that information should be recorded on a spelling test? So it seems like to me that that's something to remember forever, right? I mean, that seems like to be something to remember forever whenever it comes to September 11th, to where that a lot of the damage that it caused to our country and then also the things that for what went on during the time. And you want to know, too, that whenever you were on that morning on September 11th, that you were getting ready to take a test that morning, but then it's like something to remember by is this tour. Yeah, well, really, that that you want to know too, whenever it comes to airport security and whenever it comes to properly train people about checking things out and then checking the IDs, your ID identifications and stuff like that, and so that's why it sure seems that way. That when we think about the typical training and like yeah, typical test and all that. So we may think though that yeah, don't make a big deal about certain things, and maybe whenever it comes to checking things out a lot of times. So we all know nowadays that if you're going to be getting ready to get on board a plane, though, and let's just say if that plane is scheduled for takeoff, for 8:45 in the morning, though, right? And you're probably thinking that most of the time in the airports that those airport takeoff times, though, and a lot of times that if you're trying to get through the gates and maybe if you're just trying to, yeah, like, and I don't know, and I know that more likely airport security has changed since then, but if we're talking about that, if we're talking about maybe from back in early of 1995, though, that whenever you're trying to get your boarding pass and whenever you're trying to catch a plane, nowadays it seems like that yeah, back in the day, when I say back in the day, I'm talking about maybe from early in 1995. that whenever you were to be getting on board the plane, that you would at least have 2 hours to maybe wait for your plane, to where that you would have at least a couple of minutes, a few minutes to spend there in a terminal, to, if you want to get something to eat or maybe do some shopping around, or maybe just walk around in the terminal area until your plane was ready for departure, right? And so it sure seems that way, that that nowadays it sure seems that way, that do you really think about to where that you really have to be tested over the fact about that that whenever you do get on board the plane, Noah, that there's what you call the check for verification purposes, and check your luggage out, and then check all this just for security and all that. And so it sure seems that way, that each time whenever I think about September 11th, a lot of times it's like you not only do you really have to think about the fact about that what you were doing on that day on September 11th, but then I also had to think about this tour, that spelling test. And I can just remember that I went into work that that afternoon, and I can just remember that what they were showing on the news, and it was like, yeah, to me it looked like that the pilots had too much to drink that night, and they lost control of the plane. That's what it looked like from when I was reading about on the news. And so it sure seems that way, that looking at the planes right here, and you're likely one that looking at the plane, and it's like, number one, if the plane is flying real low to the ground, for one, that a lot of people would say that you would notice a lot of things wrong whenever you see the plane flying real low to the ground, and if it was going real fast, but then of course if it was approaching the building. And so that's why it sure seems that way, that whenever you're if you were getting ready to go shopping that morning, maybe if you were having breakfast that morning, if you were having breakfast that morning, and then you don't expect to hear the sounds of the jet engines coming in, or maybe if you hear a loud explosion, like a loud crash. And so that's why it sure seems that way, that that morning of September 11th, like a lot of everybody else would say too, that if you can remember what you were doing on September 11th. But I can just remember, it was a half day in school, and I can just remember that getting out of school right around 10:45, and I had to work that afternoon, and I can just remember that everybody else was talking about it on the news, and it was like the first thing that came to my mind was that did the pilots lose control of the plane, or was this an attack? And so it sure seems that way, that I didn't find out until about 3 o'clock that afternoon that it was an attack. And no, it was not the pilots, it was the hijackers. The hijackers that took control of the plane, and then that's when they crashed into the building. But I thought that the pilots had lost control of the plane. So there for the first 4 hours, I think about first 2 days, that I was really confused and upset about what they were talking about on the news, and why, what was going on, and why they crashed the planes into the buildings and all that. And so that's why it sure seems that way, that whenever during the time that whenever you were confused about, and during the time that you were wondering to where what was going on, and I can tell everybody here, to be quite honest with everybody here too, that whenever they were talking about it, at the school, watching the news in the library, and also whenever the principal was talking about it, I can just remember that I actually I was thinking about turning the radio on. That there was a student that had the radio on that morning. I'm like, I had the radio on, and also had the news on. But nowadays it sure seems that we have our smartphones, and we have our tablets and everything, where we were able to keep track of the news and all that. We have our iPods where we're able to follow up on the news. Our smartwatches, and But still, it sure seems that way. That during the time that it was like any other source of divine, like, yeah, like anybody say that, yeah, the stuff that you cannot really bring to school with you, and like everybody else maybe want to know too, that anything that you're going to maybe have at work with you in the 102, that really normally you would not be, you shouldn't have it on while you're in class, but we ask you to go ahead and put that on so that way we can hear about what they're talking about on the news. So the typical day of showing up for school or maybe showing up for work on September 11th is going to remind us of a lot of things, actually, besides over the fact about that, yeah, then for what went on in New York City, and for, like, yeah, in Florida, or, from, like, yeah, like everybody else would say that you were in school that day in Missouri on September 11th, and you can just remember that you had to go to work that afternoon, and it was like, it's a lot of crazy stuff, right? But I can just remember that was it August the 20th? I still have some of my schoolwork, and I don't have all of them dated, but I can just remember that it was a spelling test, and I can just remember that that in the spelling test it was that ask you to where if you don't know how, I'm like, yeah, you never forget that spelling test. But I can just remember it was right on August 29th that I was in a spelling test, on that day, and I can just remember that they asked you questions about what they were talking about on the news, and what the news was. I'm like, yeah, I think it was CNN was talking about, and then Fox News was talking about the stuff, but it sure seems that way that whenever I first heard about that, the principal got on the intercom and started talking about it. And the first thing I was thinking about was like, what are you talking about? And like, yeah, one plane that hit the Pentagon and the other one that hit the World Trade Center. So the first thing that I was thinking about was, yeah, glide stairs. The first thing I was thinking about was that a plane, a plane flying real low to the ground, and then it was approaching a building. So I can just remember that whenever the principal came on the intercom and started talking about it, I can just remember that I was in a job seeking class. I was in a class talking about jobs, filling out job applications and everything, and I can just remember that's whenever the principal was talking about it, and I can remember that he interrupted our class for about the first 15 minutes, something like that, to talking about what they were talking about on the news, and then whenever you went back to this other class that you were in, and that's whenever that they were telling you that we're going to go ahead and bring you guys to the library so that we can show you what they're talking about on the news. So it's like during the whole day, and maybe like during the whole week, that it was like you're gonna hear about that, and 102 that to where that, yeah, well, really, that anything that you have that you can have at school, like let's just say if it's a radio, or maybe if it's a smartphone or something like that, to where you're able to turn on just to see what they got to talk about on the news and all that. But it sure seems that way. That I tell everybody that I was in school on that day on September 11th, and I can tell you one thing though, that if you were supposed to maybe yeah, if you were supposed to maybe go to a dance or something like that, like I wasn't, but during the time though that I can remember that during that time that you were able. I'm like, yeah, it was a half day of class, but I had to go to work that day. Yeah, I remember that I was going to school, but then also that I can just remember that whenever I got out of school that I had to go to work that day. So I can just remember that whenever I got back home that I was able to watch TV for about 2 hours before I had to go to work. But it was like yeah, that I can just remember that the you know it, like, just reading about all that, the details right there, but just saying it's to where, yeah, the planes were hijacked. And so I can just remember that, I can just remember that I thought it was the planes, the pilots inside the airplane. So let's just say if I were to be writing a news article about something like that and saying this to where that the pilots, the pilots, the pilot, yeah, the pilots, and I think I mentioned before too that how come pilots was not on the spelling test, but still the pilots, the pilots need to have more control of the plane over the plane. So let's just say that if I were to be writing a paper about something like that, and want to know too that you're probably thinking as to where if you were to be writing a full paragraph paper about that, and I'll go and just keep this open right here, talk about over the plane, and if I were to put on quote as to where that not have too much to drink last night. And put on here for period, like for comma right there. But then they need to control. Take a more control of the plane. So it sure seems that way. If I were to be writing a paper, then maybe that would be something that I would say right there. Is that what do you think that what was going on during the time whenever you seen all that going on the news about how those planes were going into the building like that, how they were crashing into the building, and what was going on. It sounds like the way that they were showing it on TV, on television like that, you were probably thinking that the stuff that you would see like on those movies, and maybe the stunts or something like that. But still, that if that's like everybody else, point of perspective, if that's exactly what you were thinking about, is that if you seen a plane going near a building or something like that, and you're probably 102, they can't be test flying their aircraft for any reason at all. And talk about for air traffic control or something like that. So a lot of times you probably want to know too that whenever you do see something unsuspicious going on outside, looking through a window or something like that, and you're warned to where if you do see an aircraft, and 102 that if you see it flying really low to the ground like that, and you say something's wrong, and so it sure seems that way that should you speak up about any warning signs, but still that should you really speak up about situations like that to where whenever it comes to really, what all can you really do about situations like that? And even if you do find something wrong a lot of times. So I guess teachers will say too that if you see something, what do you do? When you notice something wrong, when you do notice something wrong, what are the best ways of how to handle that situation when you notice something wrong? And like everybody else would say too, that we're really, you need to have a listener, and like everybody else would say, well, just speak up about it. Well, if people are not listening, then what good is that going to do? But like everybody else would say too, that really, we'll just draw a picture, show them a picture, signs of strengths and weaknesses. So that's probably what I would say too. Your signs of strengths and weaknesses. strengths and weaknesses. So really, people really need to see what's going on before they can actually take further action, right? And a lot of times it seems like that's usually the case, right? So it sure seems that way, that whenever we talk about noticing something wrong, no, what exactly should you do? And like everybody else might even say, that if it's really out of your control, is it really out of your control? You can't really do anything about it right now at the moment. Or another thing that you can also say is to where you'll pass that sign along. So a lot of times it seems like, talk about for the transmitter. And so it sure seems that way, that nowadays with text messages nowadays and all that, and you want to know too, that that a lot of times it seems like that a lot of things for what you can do with, even with text messaging nowadays, it seems like to me that you want to know too, that how is it that you were able to miss all those warning signs that came to your attention from the beginning, whenever all of them were coming right there. They were sent to your email. And so a lot of times you want to know too, is that with a lot of this technology nowadays, and you want to know too, that if there was anything wrong that you noticed about a situation, or anything that you may noticed about something. And so that's why it sure seems that way, that anything that which comes to urgency. And I can also put right here, talk about for urgency right here, for anything urgent. And how do you spell urgency? And like anybody say that, how many of us might even say too that have you spelt it that way also? And like you want to know too if that's even a word, or if you want to call this to word that emergency or something like that. And so if you were actually taking a test a lot of times, and want to know too that I think time that anybody say it's really spelled with an E, but if you would maybe spell emergency with two M's or something like that. So like anybody else would say too, if you misspell a word or something like that. But let's just say that on average though, that if you were to spell emergency with maybe two M's or something like that, and people may want to know too that, if you do misspell a word for any reason, could that possibly get the attention of somebody who could be reading, and maybe say, do you think that maybe that could maybe trigger any sort of warning sign or something like that? So it sure seems that way, that, do you really think about that too much of the time? That whenever you do spell something incorrectly, could that also maybe put it a little bit of the opposite, to where that, we notice that there's something wrong about that, because that this is not spelled correctly, or, anything for what you call the signs of weaknesses. So a lot of times it seems like that, really, do you think that maybe that any scientist or maybe doctors would maybe want to study just a little bit about, to where that what exactly is it that you're trying to say whenever it comes to, whenever you see something wrong, and whenever you notice something wrong, and maybe if we're talking about trying to spell it out, or maybe trying to draw out a picture to try to get somebody's attention, right? So that's why it sure seems that way, that how many of us will maybe want to know too, that are we going to really spell emergency in like another way of saying it's like emergency or something like that? You spell it maybe with two I or two I's or something like that, or with the ZZE or something like that. And you want to know too that if you spell emergency or something, emergencies or something like that. So if you do misspell a word a lot of times, you want to know too that especially if it is in case of a real emergency, your hands are kind of going crazy and just typing all kinds of things on that text message, and you want to know too that that could also maybe sign any sort of warning sign, such as, hey, something's going on here, or everything okay. So it sure seems that way, that we may not notice or see somebody typing or something like that. But let's just say that with any source of emergency, though, can we really set our phones to where that if you're kind of scrambling around and maybe typing in all these texts right here and a 102, that those are not really words right there, but could they also be a source, a sign toward that somebody is trying to tell you something important, but then at the same time, that if there's an actual emergency going on, to where that they're just trying to type a number of words and phrases are going through their mind at the same time, to where that they're not, they're having a hard time understanding what you're trying to say there. And like everybody else would say, that even if you include maybe a few spaces right here, so it's like if you're trying to text somebody and saying something like, yeah. So if you're trying to talk to somebody about something, and if you're trying to text them, and if you're trying to text them within a certain amount of seconds, and it's like you're not going to see something like an emergency, or what the message is trying to say is that we need you. We need you back in the office by 2 p.m. Or ASAP. So a lot of times it's like, yeah, maybe not everybody is maybe going to get that message until about maybe a few minutes later or something like that. So a lot of times we want to know too that with technology nowadays, that you want to know too that why is it that they don't have stuff like this, to where that if you're going to be sending any messages to anybody in particular, and how come that's not on the test either, to where that any hashtags or something like that, like anybody say that this right here may look like just a bunch of annoying text right here, but like everybody else might even say that if that right there is supposed to be telling anybody about what's going on, okay, if everything okay, and so it's like so it sure seems that way, that if there was an actual emergency going on, and how many of us will maybe want to know too that whenever it comes to a text messaging or something like that, and that you'll want to know too that whenever it comes to understanding about whenever it comes to understanding about any source of emergency or something like that, and you're wondering to where, hey, if it was an actual emergency, then you just know as to where exactly about what you want to do. But anyway, thanks for watching, everyone, and have a great day.